After my previous video on World War II, I started reading about the history of Middle East in general and the Israel-Palestine conflict in particular. While going through the available reference material, I realized that the full understanding and grasp of the present-day dimensions of this conflict can only be gauged if one reads about the history of Jews and their fight for survival. So, at this point, I decided to read more about the history of Jews and its relevance in contemporary geopolitical matrix of the Middle East. It is not very easy to squeeze this timeline in just 20 to 25 minutes. Rather, I will be giving an overview of several major events. So, let's first understand who were the Jews. Jews are one of the most ancient people living on this planet. The journey of Jews has been recorded by many researchers through the study of archaeology, anthropology, and ancient history. We have more facts about Jewish history than probably of any other nation. The timeline of Jewish history starts with Abraham, who is considered as the founder of Judaism. He was believed to have born around 2170 BC. It is important to know that the Jewish saga begins around 4000 years ago from today, when the God appeared to Abraham and said to him, "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house. Unto that I will shew thee, and I will make of thee a great nation," as quoted in the first book of the Jewish Bible, called Genesis, in chapter 12. Abraham obeyed the God's orders and went to the promised land, known as Canaan, what we know today as Israel. Abraham was supposedly blessed with two sons. One was Isaac from his first wife Sarah, and the other from his second wife Hagar, named Ishmael, who later was hailed as the main figure in the history of Islam. Abraham lived with his son Isaac and his grandson Jacob, who was later renamed as Israel. Interestingly, in Hebrew, Israel literally means one who struggles with God. Israel later had 12 sons, who subsequently went on to become the 12 tribes of Jews. They were forced to migrate and stay in exile in Egypt due to a severe famine in the promised land. This period started when Joseph, the great-grandson of Abraham, led his people to Egypt. These 12 tribes slowly multiplied into the size of a nation, and the Egyptians felt threatened of them. So, in order to keep their own people safe, the Jews were made slaves by the Egyptian pharaohs. After 430 years of slavery in Egypt comes the most crucial milestone in the history of Jews. Moses, a Hebrew teacher and later revered as a prophet, led the Israelites out of Egypt when the Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites from slavery. As per few stories that float around these times, the God unleashed 10 plagues on the Egyptians, including turning the Nile River red with blood, diseased livestock, boils, hailstorms, and 3 days of darkness, culminating in the tragic death of every firstborn son in each family by an avenging angel, which destroyed Egypt and allowed the Israelite mass migration from Egypt to the land of Canaan, which was famously referred as the Exodus. The event is celebrated as Passover each year by the Jews in the Hebrew month of Nisan, which falls in March or April as per the English calendar. The Jews, with the help of Moses, crossed the Red Sea, and he brought them to Mount Sinai, where the God gave the 10 commandments to Moses. Few scholars argue that Moses did not cross the Red Sea as it exists today. However, he managed to escape with them after crossing the Red Sea, which was nothing but a small riverine flowing in ancient Egypt. Moses also wrote the Torah, the holiest book of Jewish people. It is the central and most important document of Judaism and has been used by Jews through the ages. Now let's focus a bit on what is the Torah. Torah refers to the 5 books of Moses, which are known in Hebrew as Chamisha Chumshe Torah, and at its end, Moses prophesied blessings and curses on the Israelites. Moses is believed to have said that they would be blessed if they obeyed God, but experience a curse if they did not. These blessings and curses were to follow the Jewish people ever after. The Torah comprises of the 5 books of the Jewish Bible, which include Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The generation which left Egypt with Moses never reached Canaan, as Moses died midway and they were forced to roam in the wilderness till they started believing in God. After the death of Moses, a man named Joshua led the 12 tribes back to the promised land. For several hundred years, the Israelites lived in the promised land. It is important to note that during this time, they did not have a king, nor did they have the capital city of Jerusalem. However, the times changed with the rise of King David around 1000 BC, who later was respected as a key figure in the history of Israel. It is very crucial to understand the importance of King David while looking at the history of Jews. David conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital city. He received the promise of a coming Messiah, and from that time till now, Jews have awaited the Messiah's coming. In Jewish eschatology, the term Messiah refers specifically to a future Jewish king from the Davidic line who is expected to save the Jewish nation. David's son Solomon succeeded him, and Solomon built the first Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The descendants of King David continued to rule for about 400 years, and this period was from 1000 to 586 BC. This was literally the period of Israelite glory. They had the promised blessings, they were a powerful nation, had an advanced society, culture, and their own Jewish temple in Jerusalem. But the Tanakh, the Jewish sacred writings, also described the growing corruption and widespread practice of idol worship during this time. The Israelites later became an unstable kingdom under Solomon's son Rehoboam around 930 BC because of economic mismanagement. The biblical accounts of that time state that the country split into 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south, which took Jerusalem, and from here on, the people living in this part were called Jews as we know them today. Many prophets in this period warned the Israelites that the curses of Moses would come on them if they did not change. But these warnings were ignored. Finally, around 600 BC, the curses actually came true, just like Moses had predicted around 900 years ago. In 721 BC, the Assyrian army captured the Israelite capital at Samaria and carried away the citizens of the northern kingdom of Israel into captivity. The virtual destruction of Israel left the southern kingdom Judah to fend for itself among warring Near Eastern kingdoms. In 612 BC, the kingdom of Israel was invaded by the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar, a powerful Babylonian king, defeated the Neo-Assyrians who ruled over the kingdom of Israel. Rest of the population fled to the kingdom of Judah. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar conquered the kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem. He also destroyed the temple that Solomon had built. He then exiled the Jews to Babylon. Later, the Persian Emperor Cyrus conquered Babylon, and Cyrus became the ruler of the world. The Jewish people became just the subjects in this Persian Empire. They ruled in the region for over 200 years. And during this time, Jews were permitted to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and this period was later known as the Second Temple period. Cyrus also permitted the Jews to return to their homeland, but they were no longer an independent country. Alexander the Great of Macedonia conquered the Persian Empire and gave Jews a province in the Greek Empire for another 200 years. Later, Greek rulers tried to force Greek worship practices upon the Jews, resulting in the Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabean Revolt was a Jewish rebellion lasting for about 7 years, from 167 to 160 BC, led by the Maccabees against the Greek Empire, and they succeeded in this revolt. To commemorate this revolt, the Jewish community celebrates the Hanukkah, festival of lights, each year in November or December. By this time in 2nd century BC, the Romans became the dominant world power. The Israelites again became a province in this huge Roman Empire. This timeline is historically very significant because this is the time when Jesus Christ lived, from whom the messianic hope spread mostly to Gentiles in what is known today as Christianity. This explains why the Romans and the Roman government is so prominent in the New Testament, because Rome ruled supreme at that time. Jews were also widespread throughout the Roman Empire, and this carried on to a lesser extent in the period of Byzantine rule in the central and eastern Mediterranean. In 638 AD, the Byzantine Empire lost control of the Levant. The Levant was the large area in Southwest Asia which was south of the Taurus Mountains, bounded by the Mediterranean Sea in the west, the Arabian Desert in the south, and Mesopotamia in the east. The Byzantine Empire, also referred to as the Eastern Roman Empire, was the continuation of the Roman Empire in its eastern provinces during late antiquity and the Middle Ages, when its capital city was Constantinople, which is today's Turkish capital Istanbul. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the Arab Islamic Empire under Caliph Omar conquered Jerusalem and the lands of Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine and Egypt. From the time of the Babylonians, that is 600 BC, the Israelites or Jews as they were known since then had not been independent as they had been under King David, or they were ruled by other empires. Resentment finally boiled over and the Jews revolted against Roman rule. The year 70 AD is particularly of utmost significance in Jewish history. It is this year when another catastrophe hit Jewish people as the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD and burned down the second Jewish temple, and what remained was only the Kotel, which today is better known as the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. Romans then deported the Jews as slaves across various nations in the Roman Empire. This was the second Jewish exile. The tragedy of Masada occurred in this revolt. The siege of Masada was one of the final events in the First Jewish-Roman War, occurring from 73 to 74 AD around a large hilltop in present-day Israel. After this defeat, Romans purposely renamed Judea as Syria Philistine, where we get the modern word Palestine, and they also renamed Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina to completely destroy any evidence of Jews living in Israel. And this is how the Jewish people lived for almost 2000 years, dispersed in foreign lands and never accepted in their own land. In these different nations, they regularly suffered anti-Semitic persecutions, particularly significant in the Christian Europe. From Spain, from where all Jews were expelled, across Western Europe to Russia. The Jews lived often in dangerous situations in these kingdoms and also in the Islamic caliphates. The curses of Moses from 1500 BC were accurate descriptions of how they lived. It was only during the Ottoman Empire that Jews got some respite after almost 2000 years. During the classical Ottoman period, the Jews, together with most other communities of the empire, enjoyed a certain level of prosperity. By the end of the 17th century, there were many significant Jewish populations in Western Europe. During the period of the European Renaissance and Enlightenment, significant changes occurred within the Jewish community. In the 18th century, Jews began to campaign for emancipation from restrictive laws and integration into the wider European society. During the 1870s and 1880s, the Jewish population in Europe began to more actively discuss emigration back to Israel and the re-establishment of the Jewish nation in its national homeland. In 1897, the Zionist movement was founded officially by the Austro-Hungarian Jewish journalist Theodor Herzl, and its first meeting was held at Basel in Switzerland as First Zionist Congress, where the seeds of modern Jewish state were sown. Meanwhile, the Jews of Europe and the United States gained success in the fields of science, culture and economy. What is more remarkable here is the fact that there were people who still identified themselves as Jews even after hundreds of years with anti-Semitic persecutions and without a homeland. There were some challenging times for Jews in the first half of the 20th century, especially in Europe. a fear of an upcoming war led many Jews to flee from many countries in Europe to Palestine, United States of America, and the Soviet Union. In 1939, World War II began, and until 1941, the German dictator Adolf Hitler occupied almost all of Europe, including Poland, where millions of Jews were living at that time, and also France. In 1941, following the invasion of the Soviet Union, an extensive organized operation on an unprecedented scale aimed at the annihilation of the Jewish people, what is known as the final solution, began, which resulted in the persecution and murder of Jews in political Europe. What unfolded as the final solution left the world aghast with the frightening accounts of genocide. This genocide, in which approximately 6 million Jews were brutally exterminated, is known as the Holocaust or the Shoah in Hebrew. In Poland alone, 3 million Jews were killed in gas chambers in all concentration camps combined, with 1 million at the Auschwitz camp complex. In 1945, the Jewish resistance organizations in Palestine were unified and established the Jewish resistance movement, which attacked the British authorities to overthrow the regime. On 14th May 1948, the British rule ended and David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of a Jewish state to be known as the State of Israel. What happened on the very next day might be the unique historical event of its kind. On the very next day of its independence, on 15th May 1948, the State of Israel was attacked by Egypt, Syria, Transjordan, and expeditionary forces from Iraq in what is known as the First Arab-Israeli War. In 1949, this war ended and the State of Israel started focusing on the process of nation building and absorbing massive waves of thousands of Jewish immigrants from all over the world. The official records suggest that more than 3 million Jews have moved to Israel. The phenomenon known as Aliyah, meaning Jewish immigration to the land of Israel in Hebrew. It was also remarkable since this State of Israel was established despite great opposition from almost all its neighboring countries. Most of the surrounding nations have waged war against Israel. The Arab-Israeli War in 1948, the Suez Crisis in 1956, the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and countless skirmishes and low-intensity conflicts with Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. At some point of time in the history, Israel was at war with 5 nations at the same time. Yet, not only did Israel survive, but its territories increased. It was in the Six-Day War of 1967 that Israel regained Jerusalem, their historic capital city King David had founded around 3,000 years ago. Today, Israel is a parliamentary democracy with a population of over 9 million people, of whom about 7 million are Jews. The largest Jewish communities in the world are in Israel and the United States, with major communities in France, Canada, Argentina, Russia, United Kingdom, Australia, and surprisingly even Germany. The ongoing conflicts with neighboring countries have created one of the most difficult geopolitical conflicts in the world today, which is widely considered as one of the major regional flashpoints around the world. Though Abraham's descendants now have an independent state after 4,000 years of historical events that were unfolded, the blessings promised so long ago to Abraham seem elusive even today. The Jewish diaspora all over the world may be one of the most endured people alive on this planet. What they have experienced as a community over the last 4 millennia itself is not only a matter of historical research but also a lesson to be learnt to study their indomitable spirit in the pursuit of honorable existence of any human race.